Hello, quotation rotation people, and welcome to an all-new Retro Rankings podcast episode where I'll try to be both informational while doing my best to provide something your toddler can fall asleep to. My name is Paul. I am your host, and we are pretty jam-packed today, so we're going to skip the pleasantries of typical intros that I do because this is a long one today. It is the top 7 Legend of Zelda console titles according to us. That is correct. I said us this time. We have a special guest today giving the program an upgrade. It's kind of like the new Super Retro Rankings Podcast X Pro 2. Joining me today from the passenger seat of a window-tinted cargo van parked facing your daughter's bedroom window, it's Keith from the Main Quest Podcast and Poderota's own License to Drink. Keith, how are you today?
You're being way too loud. I'm trying to keep it on the down low out here. I've had this van turned off for like the past 3 days. It's starting to get really fucking hot in here. And I'm getting like really fucking gassy because all I've been eating is takeout Taco Bell. So
Takeout Taco Bell, and you got a glove compartment full of Monster Mule, don't you?
of course, yeah. I mean the floor of this van is just littered in aluminum cans. So
I was almost highly disappointed today. I went and get my hair did, and before that I had some time to go grab a coffee from the Quick Trip, and it's one of the Quick Trips around my area that has Monster Mule, so I'm like, oh, I'm going to grab one for later for recording the podcast. And they didn't have it in the same slot as they usually do. In fact, like half the monsters were like gone. And I'm like, oh no. It was like my day was ruined because I didn't see it. So I started walking away and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go back and like double check. And it was like 2 shelves down mixed in with like something else, like the Monster Juice drinks or something this time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, oh, thank God I went back and double checked because they were there. And now I've got one cracked open. So anyway, Keith, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Main Quest podcast?
Well, the premise for my podcast is that I'm replaying just about every game that I grew up with, which also involves you in a lot of ways. And Paul's been on the show plenty of times at this point. And with every new game that I play, I put out an episode breaking down the development, story, the gameplay, music, and anything else the game has to offer. And by the end of the episode, I see if I can recommend the game. And I would say that if you come across my feed and you find an episode and you're like, oh man, fucking DuckTales is a great game. I love that game. I'm going to fucking start listening to this podcast on this episode. I wouldn't recommend doing something like that. Like my show's kind of like, kind of check your nostalgia at the door. It's just not one of those podcasts where I'm going to be fanboying, over every game that I play. There is some of that, but it's not every episode.
Right.
I try to be a little more objective, I think, than some other people are, while also kind of like poking a little bit of fun at the ridiculousness of video games on the whole. So,
right.
And then also, just real quick, I'm also doing like a side series breaking down the story of Resident Evil, all the mainline 8 games or how many there are at this point. And I've also been doing these music episodes that are solely dedicated to just video game music. So I kind of got a lot of going on. I kind of have a lot going on. and there's just kind of a lot of stuff for everybody. So, and it's tons of fun. I'm having tons of fun putting these episodes together. So go check that out if you guys got time.
Yeah, that's the thing is like, so far I've referenced your podcast, kind of because I had to, only because I kind of feel like if I'm going to be talking about something again that I already talked to you or we talked about on your podcast, I kind of have pointed people in that direction. Like, if you want to hear us talking about The Legend of Zelda for an hour and a half, that's where you got to go because I'm not going to do it here.
It was more like 3 hours, but yeah, I get it.
And that's the thing too. Like, I also try to not be nostalgic, which is why probably, some people that know me, namely you, probably, like my RPG character episode, like I could have put some characters ahead of others, but I didn't because I tried to also not let nostalgia bleed into things. Even though when I was talking about Chrono Trigger in that episode, I was like, it happened because that was probably like the most rented RPG game from Blockbuster that I ever rented for the Super Nintendo, and so it kind of ended up on my list because of nostalgia. But anyway, even though Chrono's probably not, I'd say, this one of the strongest characters to appear on a top 10 list, but that's just me. It happened. But anyway, speaking of Resident Evil Village, did you ever finish that game?
I haven't even started it yet.
You haven't started it yet, so I can't
playing-
talk to you about it?
No, I'm playing them all in order. You can talk to me about Resident Evil 5 if you want. That's the latest one that I played.
That's one of the two that I've never played. So, actually, no, one of the three. I never played 5, 6, and 7. So I basically went from 4 straight to Village, and I actually finished Village, and I'm kind of proud of myself. But I wanted to talk to you about it. But God damn it, shit! I wanted to talk to you about that fucking ending. Fuck.
Are you proud of yourself because you beat it, or because you didn't beat it?
I'm proud of myself because because I'm a game jumper, and usually I'll jump from game to game to game, and then I'll maybe sometimes go back to a game and then pick up where I left off, which I'm trying so hard not to do because it's so hard to do that,
Yeah.
As far as especially like
There's a lot of video games.
Yeah. It's been like we're almost like in like a whole new renaissance or something the last few years. It's absolutely insane. And unfortunately, I'll say something. I kind of got myself into a little bit of a trap. That I just got out of. I thought the Xbox Series X was much more backwards compatible than it actually is. So there's probably about like 16 Xbox and Xbox 360 games that I bought that don't work with it. So I have to now resell them and probably lose some money in the process. But that at least gets rid of 16 games that I thought I'd be playing at some point. Yeah. But so speaking of playing games, so you're going through the Resident Evils in order here. What else have you been playing lately?
Nothing that I can really divulge. It's just a lot of podcast related stuff.
Oh, top secret stuff, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I've been posting a lot of stuff on my Instagram as far as Horizon goes, and that's not because of the reveal trailer or gameplay trailer that just came out. It's because I'm actually going to be doing an episode on it later.
Interesting.
So I've been playing that, but I can't really talk about it.
Okay. We'll keep it on the down low. All right. Well, now that we're done with that, let's spend about 3 hours talking about The Legend of Zelda and its timeline. I'm just kidding. We're not going to do that, but we are going to do something a little later.
Wait, we're not?
No.
What am I supposed to do with these 5 pages of notes I fucking took over the past week?
Well, what you can do with those notes
Just
about
kidding.
the timeline.
I don't have any fucking notes.
Oh, I was going to say, because I kind of prepped you for this, so I thought maybe you seriously probably wrote some stuff down, because we are going to play a little game later. And, and I think when I prepped you, I said you could have taken some notes, but it's going to be, what we're going to go through is the brief series history and story behind us all. And, I mean, we're going to really kind of like dive into each game as we rank them, and not so much the timeline. The timeline's going to be for a game later. and so we'll get to that, and we'll see how well you do. But yeah, so the following in this format today is I'm going to give my ranking, starting out with 7, and then Keith is going to give his. And for each new game that's introduced, we're just going to give a brief overview of the game, and then we'll just banter, and we'll just keep moving right along. So, with that being said, let's get into it. We are going into the top 7 Zelda console titles. Number 7, The Wind Waker. The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker is the 10th main installment of the Legend of Zelda series. It is the first Zelda game for the Nintendo GameCube and was released in Japan on December 13th, 2002, in Canada and the US on March 24th, 2003, in South Korea on April 16th, 2003, in Europe on May 2nd, 2003, in Australia May 7th, 2003. That is fucking crazy. Jesus. Anyway, The Wind Waker is notable for being the first game in the series to employ cel shading, lighting and texturing technique that results in the game having a cartoon-like appearance. It also differentiates itself from other Zelda games with its massive overworld called the Great Sea, which must be explored using a boat, the King of Red Lions. It is an indirect sequel to Ocarina of Time, taking place several hundred years after the events of the previous games. Although the seafaring gameplay and cartoon-like graphics were a point of critique for some, The Wind Waker was, in the end, the 4th best-selling GameCube game of all time. However, it should be noted that pre-orders of the game were significantly boosted by the inclusion of a pre-order bonus disc, which features Ocarina of Time and Master Quest, and that, I had that disc, and that is one of the things I got rid of, and I hate myself for it to this day. Master Quest is an altered port of the original Ocarina of Time, with partially redesigned and more difficult dungeons. In 2007, a direct sequel to The Wind Waker entitled The Phantom Hourglass was released on the Nintendo DS, which I just finished. That was like one of 3 handheld games in the Zelda series that I never played, and I just finished it. So I'm getting there. During a Nintendo Direct on January 23rd, 2013, an enhanced remaster of the game was announced for the Wii U console called The Wind Waker HD and was released during the fall of that year. So, The Wind Waker falls into my number 7 slot today. Keith, what is your number 7 Zelda title?
My number 7 is The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess is the 13th main installment of the Legend of Zelda series, released for both the Nintendo GameCube and Wii. It was highly anticipated by many members of the gaming community and was regarded as finally fulfilling the dreams of those who wanted a much more realistic amateur Zelda game, as seen in the Space World 2000 GameCube tech demo. This is the first Zelda game to be rated T by the ESRB and 12 plus by PEGI. The reason is probably because of the violence, blood, as seen when Link strikes Dark Beast Ganon. It drips when it runs around, and also when a Deku Baba is defeated. And signs of nudity, as shown by the Great Fairy, although only violence and blood are listed as descriptions for the rating. This game is also notable for being the first console Zelda title released in the United States before Japan, as the Wii version was released in America on November 19th, 2006, whereas the Japanese versions were released on December 2nd. Because of this, Twilight Princess was one of the launch titles for the Wii, alongside Wii Sports in the US. During a Nintendo Direct on November 12th, 2015, a remaster of the game for the Wii U called Twilight Princess HD was announced, and was later released in March 2016. On December 5th, 2017, Twilight Princess was released for an NVIDIA Shield TV exclusively in China. I didn't read any of that. That was all in my head.
I didn't read any of what I said either. Yes, we just completely have this all memorized. Okay. So, interesting. So let me tell you why I've got Wind Waker where I've got it. Believe it or not, well, you'll find out at the end of this that there's one game that didn't make my top 7, which is no surprise to some people. But of all the console titles, Wind Waker,
That's weird because there's some games that didn't make my top seven either. Go ahead.
a specific title, and I'll get into it just a tad right at the end. But the Wind Waker was one Zelda title when it came out where I've never been one to like water in video games. I just don't like water in video games. I hate swimming levels in video games. I never liked the fishing games, if you want to call it that, in Zelda games. That mechanic, I've never liked it. Unfortunately, as a completionist, it's something that I have to do. And I hate it. I just don't like water. And so when I first played this Wind Waker when it came out, I played it for maybe like an hour, and I was like, nah, I don't like it. Like, it had nothing to do with the cel shaded graphics, which is what turned most people off. Like, when I said it was like a contentious part of the game for people was the way it looked. I just didn't like the water. I didn't like being on the water. I didn't like the fact that in order to get around the game, you had to be on a boat on water. And of course, fishing was a big part of it, and then finding treasure. So it took me a while to go back to the game. It took me to the point where I think when it was re-released, the HD was re-released. And that's when I went back to it. And I was like, it was painful for me. It really, truly was painful for me. I got through it. I 100%ed the game. But, you know, I kind of felt too then like playing the Phantom Hourglass, like I'm going to hate myself all over again. Because that is another game that I did try to pick up and play for a little bit. And I'm like, you know what? It's water. I fucking hate this. I already did it with Wind Waker. But I needed to finish it. So I replayed it again and finished it recently. I just hate water in a game, and that's really it. That's the reason why Wind Waker falls where it does. Otherwise, I love the way the game looks. I love the way the game controls. Of course, love the music. I mean, I think the Wind Waker's got some of the best music in the series. If it wasn't... Honestly, if you, I think, replaced most of that water with land, it'd probably be a little bit higher on my list, but unfortunately, that's where it lands. So why does Twilight Princess land at number 7 for you?
Well, it's kind of an interesting reason. So I actually polled my own audience a few weeks back because I couldn't honestly figure out which spot to put this game. I knew it was going to be on my list, but I wasn't sure where it would be. And I think 7 is a pretty decent spot for me. But I bought this game at launch. Well, near launch. It came out a little bit later for the GameCube. I never actually had a Wii until about like 2015. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I mean, if you played Twilight Princess for the Wii, that version, you actually played the wrong one because Link doesn't use his right hand. He's left-handed. So
right.
You played the wrong one. I'm sorry. But but I mean, Twilight, I mean, I remember, Twilight Princess. I mean, this was it for that poor failed console, the fucking GameCube. Like, this was it. And I mean, it was a hell of a game to go out on. I remember being like super excited for this game. It was 2006, and it still kind of felt like a new Zelda coming out was an event. Like everybody's talking about it.
Right.
And I think it was actually one of the last times I actually took off of work to play a game. And my initial thoughts of it when I played it was like, like I felt like it was a little lackluster, which I guess I want to get back to in a minute. But I did come back to it a few years later, around like maybe 2009 or 2010, and I actually enjoyed it much more than I did when I first initially played it. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I love, you want to talk about atmosphere in a game. again, I'm playing through Horizon right now, and Twilight Princess does a similar thing where it mixes like this very like earthy human imagery with like alien technology kind of.
Right.
And there's just like this real melancholic feel to the game, and the character designs are just like really fucking weird. They're really funky and like pretty creative. Um, like to me, it wouldn't feel out of place if the game's title was prefixed with Tim Burton presents The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess, because a lot of the characters look like something out of like Corpse Bride or Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, I suppose.
And a lot of those NPCs, you don't really see this in a lot of modern Zelda, or a lot of the Zelda games, period. But a lot of those NPCs are so fucking detailed and unconventional, and you don't get that anymore. And one thing I think all the Zelda games excel at is its supporting characters. Like,
Yes.
to be honest, Link, Zelda, and Ganon, they're not characters. Zelda, I think they pay a lot of attention to Zelda most of the time, but Link and Ganon are pretty much it. Here's the good guy, here's the bad guy, But I think what the series really does very well is its supporting characters. And Midna is so fucking cool. Her design in both her imp form and not her human form, her humanoid form. Is that
Sure.
Yeah, it's just so unique. And even just the way she speaks, like the way her dialogue, I mean, there's not spoken dialogue, but she has the little like, there's sounds that play when she talks, and it's just cut up English basically. So the way they rearrange it just makes it sound like she comes from another world. Her whole attitude, she's very fucking sassy, but it's like endearing. And then like the end of the game is just fucking heartbreaking, man. I mean, when she breaks the mirror and everything, it's just like, yeah, you won't see me anymore.
Right.
And then when she gets sick, and then her theme starts playing, which is just like probably one of the best uses of music in the series. It's so fucking good. And I think for both you and I, we're probably going to mention music a lot on this episode. I don't want to spend too much time on music of every game.
Right.
The Zelda series has, hands down, my favorite music of any video game series. And even if I absolutely hate a Zelda game, chances are I probably like its soundtrack. And Twilight Princess just has a phenomenal soundtrack.
Yes.
The final fight with Ganondorf is fucking cool. You're just on Hyrule Field surrounded by fire, and you're just having a fucking sword fight.
Yep.
Nintendo, with this game, Nintendo just really nailed that cinematic feel.
It really was the epitome. That ending in the series is really the epitome of good versus evil. They really nailed it.
Yeah. And I just want to quickly, before I'm done, I just want to go back to my initial thoughts of what I thought in 2006. And the only reason why this game is at the bottom of my list is because I always felt like Twilight Princess was the Zelda game Nintendo didn't want to make. I felt that way back then, and I still feel that way now. And it would be nice if games were like released in a vacuum, but they aren't. So I kind of have to include the meta reality of this game's existence, because the only way, or the only reason why this game's aesthetics and tone are what they are is because this was a direct response to the backlash Wind Waker got for being too cartoony and lighthearted. So to me, it just kind of feels like the product of Nintendo throwing a temper tantrum and being like, "Here, fine, take your video game."
That almost sounded like a Link sound when you first started.
It just so that's kind of how I feel about it. I mean, whether or not that's true or not, it's to be honest, it's probably actually the last time Nintendo has ever listened to their fans, for better or for worse.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, I mean, that's all very true. I mean, and the thing, and it goes back to when we're talking about that. If I remember correctly, it's the fans wanted that. The fans wanted a darker adult Zelda title, and then when Nintendo showed off some very early demo-ish gameplay of the next Zelda game, that's what we got. And the fans are like, "Yep, that's what we want. We want that. You better put that out." And they did. And since then, there are fans of the series that like, "Yep, we want more of that. Keep it coming," and it hasn't happened since. And I mean, Breath of the Wild kind of maybe came close, but it wasn't dark. It was a little bit more mature, but it wasn't dark by any means. So you kind of had like some fans that were like, kind of like, I mean, yeah, it'll do, but more Twilight Princess type stuff. Bring that back. And
I mean,
Nintendo hasn't done it.
I mean, it doesn't get any darker than Majora's Mask.
I mean yeah. As far as dark, yeah, it doesn't. But as far as the aesthetics of an adult like Link in a darker world for the most part, that's Twilight Princess. But yeah, Nintendo. There's people that think that Nintendo does fan service, but they don't. They don't. If you got to think deep down, like into it, and you'll realize Nintendo doesn't give a shit about the fans. They really kind of don't. So, anyway, we should probably.
What's your number 6?
We should probably move along. Number 6 on my list is the OG, The Legend of Zelda. The Legend of Zelda is the first installment of the Zelda series. It centers its plot around a boy named Link, who becomes the central protagonist throughout the series. Yay! It came out as early as 1986 for the Famicom in Japan and was later released in the Western world, including Europe and the US in 1987. Let's just simplify all those dates. It has since then been re-released several times, several being the key word here, for the Nintendo GameCube as well as the Game Boy Advance. The Japanese version of the game on the Famicom is known as the Hyrule Fantasy: The Legend of Zelda. I'm not going to get too much into detail here because The Legend of Zelda has made my first episode, and talking about Link made my RPG episode. And both episodes I pointed to your podcast of us talking about this game. So talk about beating a dead horse. It'd be like a field of dead horses and me just going around beating the fuck out of all of them. That's not going to happen. I'll just say plain and simple. The reason why, well, I mean, compared to the Wind Waker, the only reason why it is above Wind Waker is because there's no water.
There's some water. You gotta use a raft.
Well, yeah, to go across like a half a screen and then you're done. But and there's really no like water temples to speak of, or dungeons, if you will. Nostalgia does play a big part, but it doesn't play a big enough part to make it any higher on the list, at least. It is the original. For me, it's still the go-to. It's probably the one that I've played second most. I go back to it every couple years just to play through it. And it's cemented itself in history. It's what started everything, and it's what's the game that started. And I didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know it was going to happen until A Link to the Past. That like, wow, I really fucking love this franchise. But The Legend of Zelda, it's the OG. It's what started it for me, and that's simply put. That's all I'm going to say. That's why it's at my number 6. So, what is your number 6?
I'm going to say because I kind of, when I plugged my podcast and what it's about and how I said don't come with nostalgia, just sitting down with you to talk about our favorite Zelda games. A lot of this is going to be a rare thing, especially if my audience comes to your podcast and listens to this. This is going to be the rare case of me waxing poetically about my nostalgia for stuff. So none of this was like very not. Obviously, I thought about which ones I like the best. but a lot of this wasn't, scientifically, thought out with surgical precision or anything like that. I'm like, this is how I feel about these games. So
Right.
it's just going to be kind of like a rare thing for people to hear from me. So with that said, my number 6 is The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword.
Whoa.
It's the 16th main installment of the Legend of Zelda series. It is the first Legend of Zelda game created specifically with the Wii in mind and requires Wii Motion Plus. Upon its North American release, a special edition Skyward Sword bundle became available at the price of $69.99. The bundle includes a copy of Skyward Sword as well as a gold Wii Remote Plus. Additionally, a limited edition CD featuring music from the Legend of Zelda 25th Anniversary Symphony concerts is also packaged alongside all early purchases of the standard and special edition copies of Skyward Sword. A high-definition remaster of the game Skyward Sword HD was confirmed as part of the February 17th, 2021 Nintendo Direct. It is slated for release on July 16th, 2021.
Just a few weeks from now, yeah.
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 So I took a break from playing video games between like 2010 and 2015. And when I came back in 2015, I wanted to do franchise runs, playing all the games that I missed in a franchise, basically.
Right.
And one of those franchises was Zelda. Skyward Sword obviously had its reputation for reasons that I'm not going to get into because we're kind of strapped for time. We're going to be here forever if I completely talk about everything about this game. But I came to this game blind in 2015, knowing almost nothing except for people bitching about it. And I get it. I totally get it. But outside of the motion controls and a boss fight that you have to repeat fucking 4 times, Skyward Sword is probably one of the most creative Zelda games. And then on top of that, I just think it's fucking gorgeous. The writing and the art style go hand in hand. They're just so... It's kind of like a Japanese Disney game in a lot of ways. It mixes like anime and like Disney. The visuals are the complete opposite of the game that came before it. It's Twilight Princess. It's got like this this very loud, hyper stylized, like pastels.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way of putting it, sure.
And it's got like this like surreal brushy look, like it's like been painted. It's really hard to describe the art style of this game. It just goes for a more like fantasy look than those kind of like drab realistic tones of Twilight Princess, which works for Twilight Princess's setting and everything. Like that fits the tone just fine. But I love this almost like watercolor aesthetic of Skyward Sword. It's like somewhere between Wind Waker and like Ocarina of Time almost. It's like the best of both worlds. And I feel like I kind of just smashed on or dunked on Twilight Princess a little bit, but that game looks like a mid-aughts video game. It's quite literally came out during literally the dark ages of gaming. Mm-hmm. But Skyward Sword, I mean, I think the setting is great. It's supposed to be the origins of the Master Sword. Mm-hmm. It's the beginning of the timeline, which I don't even want to get into. I just don't know why that asinine thing even exists.
Well, technically, it is at the beginning of the timeline, but there's actually still a beginning before it. There's just no game yet, so...
That's what I was going to say next. Like, there's lore that you find in the game that goes back further.
Like, we could technically have a prequel to that with just the goddesses,
Right.
That's what it really begins with, so...
And because of, like, that mystery and stuff, I feel like, when you do first enter Farron Woods, when you step it onto the Earth or planet or whatever the Zelda takes place, I think that atmosphere hits really fucking hard because everything just looks so old and nature has basically reclaimed everything. And it kind of reminds me of Shadow of the Colossus because, in a way, it just doesn't seem like you're supposed to be here. It's like this holy, sacred land, you know? A lot of people, going into one of the complaints, knock this game for having to revisit the same areas, but every time you go back to those areas, there's something different going
It's
on.
different. Yeah. That was,
Yeah, you're never,
I was going to say
you're
that.
never, go ahead.
I was going to say that is the one thing that it did different for the series is that when you went back someplace, because there's been times where you have to backtrack, but it's always the same place. But in this time, like when you go back to a place, there's different things going on. There's different objectives. Sometimes even the world around you has changed, you know. And I'll give Skyward Sword that.
It's like
praise.
a Metroidvania in a lot of ways.
Yeah, right.
You know, you're never doing the same thing twice in that same area.
Right.
And each area kind of seems like a rotating dungeon all its own, but then on top of that, you actually have the dungeon in that area. So, which, you know, the dungeons themselves aren't too hard, but they kind of make you feel smart sometimes. I mean, I haven't even talked about the characters or the music. One thing I should note about the music, obviously it's fucking awesome, but it's also the first time in the franchise that the series has used real orchestrated music. So I think that's something to kind of note here. Girahim's a fucking awesome villain. Super anime. Kind of reminds me of Kefka from Final Fantasy VI. I love how Zelda and Link actually have a relationship at the beginning of the game. I guess I'm kind of avoiding the elephant in the room, Fi, the manifestation of the Master Sword. I can't defend Fi. I can't defend it. I won't. I won't even try to defend Fi. But that's kind of it for me. I honestly can't wait to play Skyward Sword again and when it drops for the Switch and just kind of see how they improved it, because the game, it's not perfect and it is frustrating in places, and I get that. But besides for those frustrations, I thought it was really fun to play. I didn't even talk about Lanayru Desert. It's fucking one of the best areas of the game. There's just not enough time. So yeah, I would say go play Skyward Sword. Try it
out. I'm glad you would say that, and we'll just leave it at that. All right, so I'm not going to talk about Skyward Sword just yet, but we'll move along here. And my number five is Twilight Princess. So we already gave the small abridged background of the game because you already spoke about that. For me, Twilight Princess, I've played it twice. I played it twice, and the only reason why I played it twice, actually, because the first time I played it, I didn't 100% complete it because I thought the bug collecting was ridiculous. But me being me, I couldn't just let that go, so I played it a second time and collected all those goddamn bugs. But
it should. I just want to add that there is not a single Zelda game that has a good side quest.
There's not.
They're all pretty bad.
There's one that's got the worst one of them all, which we can talk about a little bit later. But anyway, to me, it kind of, if we're taking like 11 console titles, I mean, Twilight Princess for me, it's like the mix of it's to me, it's almost like, what am I trying to say? It's so hard to say. It's not terrible, but it's not the best. It's really just a well-balanced Zelda title for me, which is why it's kind of like in the middle for me. all the things that you said and some of the things that I already talked about, it just overall, um, for the first time ever, too, like we didn't have an annoying companion. I wasn't like
Yeah,
after a couple hours, I wasn't like,
that's another
shut the
reason why
fuck
I
up.
love Midna so well.
Yeah, yeah. Like she wasn't annoying whatsoever, and really like when she starts, when you start finding out more about her, you really do develop almost like you said it because it's heartbreaking at the end. You've developed feelings for a character that's not even really the main character of the game, and that's the first time that's happened in a Zelda title, and like the only time that's ever happened in a Zelda title. I don't even sometimes even give a shit about Zelda, you know. Um, I could give a crap if like it's the end and she dies or something. I don't care. In a way, no, I do, but yeah, like that is really that and the aesthetic are the two main reasons why it falls where it does on my list. Other than that, like the wolf thing, like I still am like it's kind of cringy to me, that whole mechanic of the game and following scent trails and digging, and like I'm like, you know,
Yeah,
I
that's.
didn't like those parts of the game like at all.
I'm trying not to like focus too much on the stuff I don't like on these games, but yeah, I definitely never enjoyed Wolf Link.
Yeah, yeah, that's
But every Zelda has its gimmick. There's always some gimmick
oh
to
sure,
every game.
sure, but you know, I just that's why I think like it's got like a lot of good things going for it, and it's got probably that's probably the worst of it for me. And the music, I mean, gosh, we shouldn't really, we could just be like the music's good, the music's bad, and just leave it at that. The music is good. Because I could do an entire episode on like, and I'm probably going to that my top 7 favorite Zelda songs. It's probably going to happen. But yeah, I think Twilight Princess is just a well balanced game, and that's why it kind of falls right in the middle for me at number 5.
My number 5 is The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, which is a Nintendo Switch remake of the Game Boy game Link's Awakening. It was
Hmm.
officially announced during a Nintendo Direct on February 13th, 2019, and was released on September 20th, 2019. Um, so this
This
is
is
kind of
really
a
this is interesting. Go ahead.
this is a weird thing to have on this list because I mean you sent me a list of the games in which we had to choose from,
Right,
or choosing console games.
right.
But it's kind of weird to include this because a lot of my connections to this game are from the original Game Boy version.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, having to talk about this game, I can't talk about it without talking about the original because they're literally the same except for the visuals. Like, part of me thinks this is cheating because, like, I mean, even though you could technically play this on the console, it's still very much a hand. It's very much a handheld Zelda game from top to bottom.
Yeah.
But this is your format. I feel like you could have included another game on here to be considered for a top 7. But since you left that one out, this is the one that's going to take the place for me. So, um, I I grew up with the original black cartridge version, you know. And that's the thing too, you know, every Zelda cartridge has something special to it, right? Which is something after what the N64 they kind of just lost. They stopped doing because you can't. A gold disc doesn't look cool, you know.
Well,
You're not
plus
going
you
to
never
see it.
see it. Yeah.
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 But then eventually, I think we got the DX version for Game Boy Color, and I mean, this is, I think, the pinnacle of 2D Zeldas for that time. There's something so traditional about it, and in the way the dungeons and puzzles are designed, they're put together so well. And this is also the very rare instance where we get a different story.
Mm-hmm.
It is that same Zelda gameplay, but it has like this refreshing, self-contained story that had, or it still doesn't have anything to do with the mainline games. And this is something that only happens, I think, like one other time with Majora's Mask, which, now that I mention Majora's Mask, I guess this game has actually a lot of common with Majora's Mask, because it is kind of a dark story. Link washes up on an island, and then he finds out that he's, spoiler alert, he's trapped inside of a dream, and the entire island is actually just like this manifestation of this giant sleeping whale's dream.
Mm-hmm.
And you go through the game, you go through talking to all of the inhabitants of the island, and you really familiarize yourself with them because the game is so small. And so as you get closer and closer to waking up the windfish, you're collecting these instruments, because obviously loud noises are going to wake that motherfucker up. The NPCs, like, they make it pretty clear to you that if you do wake the windfish up, they'll all die, I think what kind of ruins this whole feeling, this whole dealing with your own mortality, is kind of ruined because the game is linear. Like, you have to go through with it to beat the game. Or I don't know, maybe you just never beat the game.
Yeah,
but...
maybe you just turn it off and you're like, fuck this, I'm done.
Yeah. But then, hey, you wouldn't hear one of the best songs in the game, Ballad of the Windfish. Yeah, I mean, besides for the story and the atmosphere of the game, it's just so different. I guess because I got to talk about the remake, right? The visuals for the 2019 version, I think, just work so well with that atmosphere and the story. It's got kind of like this hazy, dreamlike look to it. I just, honestly, I mean, when I saw it, I was sold on it right away. I can't think of a better art style for this game, to be honest. I can't see it just being a regular top-down 2D remake. It's kind of got like it's like 3D, but it's not. It's still very much 2D. And of course, there's a lot of quality of life changes to the Switch version, since the Game Boy, the original Game Boy game, was held back by those hardware limitations. I just think it's a really good adaptation of a very unique Zelda game. And I don't think we can talk about this game without talking about Eagle's Tower, which is probably one of the top 5 like hardest Zelda dungeons. It's up. Don't even talk to me about the water temple. The water temple's not that hard. Eagle's Tower is like, because most of the dungeons in Link's Awakening aren't that difficult, but once you get to those like last two, and Eagle's Tower, I think it's the one before the last one. It's quite the difficulty spike because you're so used to, especially in the original game, it's a 2D Zelda, but you have to, the entire dungeon is a puzzle, and you have to think very vertically as far as the puzzles go. So I don't know. It's a very quirky, again, unique Zelda game with fresh coat of paint. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, hold on.
Oh shit, are we going into Silent Hill? Dude, you gotta get the fuck out of there.
Waukesha is so crazy. County is so crazy with sirens. Like, even where I work, there's like these random ass sirens that just go off. I'm like, what? Why? Why does this happen around here? I don't get it. It must be like a country, living out in the country thing. All right. Anyway, um, yeah. So this, when I wrote down all the console titles, like, this was on the list with an asterisk because, yeah, it's a handheld game, but yeah, it was re-released for what's technically a hybrid console. I mean, the Switch is a console, and you can either play it on the TV as you would with any other console, or you can take your console with you on the go. And so I'm like, technically, it is a console title, and I struggled so hard when I was making that because I do really like Link's Awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggled really hard when I made this list, and I'm like, like, a part of me would be way too nostalgic with it, number one, and number two, for a console title, it's still relatively a short game. And I'm like, with the nostalgia.
That's why I said it's a very handheld game.
Yeah, right,
still.
right. So I'm like, it can't make mine, and so I kind of give them that away right now. It can't make my top 7, unfortunately. But
yeah, I mean the nostalgia for me is like heavy. I mean, even just playing the remake, it felt like I was sitting on my bedroom floor playing the Game Boy Color version.
Right. I mean, Link's Awakening was really, and it still is to this day. Well, we'll get into that in another episode, or I will. I don't know if you'll be joining me along, but it is quite literally one of the best Zelda handheld titles ever so far, right next to another one. But
the Minish Cap.
No,
Oh,
no, not for me.
I love the Minish Cap.
That's a good game.
Go ahead.
Wait, let's not.
I just want to throw that in there.
Okay, well, you play the other like 5 handheld titles you never played, and maybe we can talk about it on another episode. But anyway, so it was really tough for me to throw it in. It's probably like number 9 or something for me, somewhere around there. But the game is. I couldn't have, like you said, like I couldn't have asked for a better looking remake of a handheld game. It was like, it's almost like you're playing with a plastic toy. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. It comes off like so well. Like, they could have easily taken like a Wind Waker aesthetic and said, if we want a boyish, cartoony looking game, let's just do the Wind Waker thing again for like the 6th time.
Right.
And they didn't do it. They said, let's just do something completely different. We don't even have to upgrade, just splash some colors on there or something and keep it looking more along the lines of a Link to the Past. Let's just completely overhaul the look of it and do something brand new. And they did. And yes, like you said, like the screen around it, it's cloudy, so that it's almost like you're peering into someone's head when you're playing it. The dream,
Yeah.
like
That's a good way
aspect
of
of
putting it.
Yeah, and yeah, Link's Awakening is very nostalgic, and because it's still much more of a handheld game, even though it was on my list with an asterisk because it is on a console, the remake, I couldn't place it there. But props to you for putting it in there on your list.
Now, what would have made my number 5 had it been on your list of games to include would be Cadence of Hyrule, but I won't get into that.
Yeah. So that and like the Hyrule Warriors and Link's crossbow training. Those weren't gonna make it. Those were
Wait,
gonna be.
crossbow training wasn't on here? I'm gonna have to change my number one. Fuck. Hold on.
All right, so let's move along here with number 4 on my list is The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask.
I'm gonna say right now that's my number four as well.
All right.
So we
Well,
can talk about it.
I'm gonna flip a coin. Oh, I win. The Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask is the sixth main installment of the Legend of Zelda series. First released on the Nintendo 64 in 2000. Unique among the Legend of Zelda series, the game includes a time system that spans 3 days, and this cycle must be reset periodically to progress through the game. Majora's Mask is one of the few Zelda games in which Ganon does not play any role whatsoever. In addition, Princess Zelda does not play a major role. She's only seen once in a flashback from Ocarina of Time. Majora's Mask is the sequel to the first 3D Zelda game, Ocarina of Time, and uses the same engine, as well as many art resources. Many of the conventions pioneered in Ocarina of Time are present in Majora's Mask, including characters, enemies, and items. During a Nintendo Direct on November 5th, 2014, a remake of the game was announced for the Nintendo 3DS titled Majora's Mask 3D, and it was released in February 2015. So this is also your number 4.
Mm-hmm.
So we can just freely talk about it. As far as I'm concerned, there's one thing going for Majora's Mask that places it where it does for me, in that I do love Ocarina of Time so much that it was nothing more than an extension of that game, with a few things that make it good, like like I said, the time system. That time system is so, it drives your anxiety up when you're playing this game, because you have to basically race the clock throughout the whole game and get to a point where you time travel to reset it and then start over again racing the clock. Like that was crazy. And I think that the mask itself, Majora's Mask, if you want to call it a character, I mean, it is
Majora's a character, yeah.
And Skullboy, by extension, are good characters, and they have cemented themselves in...
So weird.
What?
No, I'm just saying that Skull Kid and the combination of Skull Kid and Majora's Mask is just such a fucking weird character.
Yeah, it was like so far out there. I mean, you talk about being dark, they were the epitome of darkness, and they've cemented themselves in Zelda lore as being one of the greatest, if you will, combination of two characters ever created for the series. And the only reason why it's not any higher on my list is because Ocarina of Time already did what it did. And I wouldn't say that Majora's Mask is any better. For me, I look at Majora's Mask as a rehash or a continuation that is just as good with some different mechanics to make it feel fresh. And, you know, that moon, man, you know, that's the other thing you think of too when you think of Majora's Mask, is that fucking moon, man. Like, that thing always got, like, I think the first time I ever tried playing through it, that moon freaked me out so much. Like, you're talking... I mean,
you almost didn't want to like hit the Z button and look up, you know?
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, I was an adult. I was like 23 or something, 22 or 23 when it came out, and I'm still like, fuck this. Like that thing, like fuck. Like I never finished it the first time through. I think when I went through my whole retro re-gaming phase, like a few years later, and I started like playing through games that I really did like, but I just never finished. That's when I finally finished it, and then of course I replayed the 3D version, which on the 3DS, which does look pretty sharp. Whether you have it in 3D or not, I don't know if you've played it.
No.
But you know, that's kind of why it's not any higher, because to me it was already done before and it's just got some different things going on for it. It's almost like, and I don't want to speak too much of it, but for me it's almost like Phantom Hourglass and being like, this was already done before with Wind Waker, only it's got some new things going on just to make it that much more interesting to keep you playing it, but it's kind of, they've already done it. But it does make my list where it does too, because the Skullboy and Majora's Mask and the whole concept of time in it was just enough to keep you going through the game, where it's like I've got to beat the clock and reset time and do it again, and you almost feel like you would fail. So I mean, for me, oh boy, this is so hard to explain. I personally would feel like much more of a failure letting the moon crash. Like, I'm really bad at putting stuff like this into words, but just simply dying in any other game and having that game over screen is just like, pick it up and start over again. But it's almost like that moon is so imposing and my anxiety is so high that it's like, you got to do it, you got to do it, you got to do it. Oh, good, I did it. Now I got to do it again. Now I got to do it. And you kind of the game kind of pulls you in that way. And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's why Majora's Mask is where it is for me at number 4. It's not as good as Ocarina of Time, which I'm kind of giving something away, I think, by saying that. But it's better than, in my opinion, than the other Zelda titles we've already covered, or I have on my list.
I mean, I'm probably gonna mirror a lot of what you said, but I mean, this game introduces Tingle, so I don't know what else you would want.
Tingle. I fucking love Tingle. Except in when I was playing Four Sword Adventures, Tingle's whole thing is that when you real quick, it's because it's funny. You find him underneath a bridge. He's living underneath a bridge, and all he wants to do is find these like triangle shards that you have to collect throughout the game in order to power up your Four Sword. And the chunkier the triangle, like the larger the triangle, that's worth more points. If you uncover them on a screen, Tingle starts slowly floating into the screen on a balloon. Because his whole thing is like, I'm gonna go ahead and get this triangle one before you do. And if you grab it, he'll go, "Aww," and then he'll turn around and start floating slowly back out of the screen. And it's like of the entire Four Sword game, that he's literally the best part of it. But okay, so I've said my piece. Go ahead.
But yeah, Majora's Mask is one of those games. Like early, because I was starting to, like, when this came out, I was starting to get into like horror movies and stuff like that, and obviously survival horror games were a thing already. Silent Hill, Resident Evil came out, but this was like the first Nintendo game that I just remember being terrified of as a kid. And a lot of that has to do with just its aesthetics. I think the low poly models of the N64 kind of enhance the overall creepiness of the game. But also it's a Zelda game. I wasn't not gonna play it. And I'll admit I used a guide to get through the game back then, and even now I still need to use a guide. Because there's so much going on in this game, and some of that also comes down to the time management, which we mentioned. You only got 3 days to save Termina, otherwise the moon's going to crash into it. And I think a big part of what you said about this game feeling like there's something at stake. Like you feel like you failed at the end of the third day having to restart. And I think a big part of that is because you are restarting from zero again. There's very few things that carry over to that first day,
Right.
you know? So it's not just, oh, you die and you pick up all from your last save. It's you are restarting all over again.
Mm-hmm.
At the time when this came out, I mean, this was completely different from any Zelda game, and it still kind of is. I don't think the games have ever tried to be this different ever since. And I think I've probably beat this game maybe like 4 times now. And because I was getting into like survival horror games and just horror movies and stuff like that, I was just really attracted to this game because of such this fucking creepy, dark atmosphere, and which now, you know, playing it as an adult, and you actually learn the intricacies of like what's actually happening to these people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't even really know where to start. I mean, first of all, there's the whole theory that at the beginning of the game, Link dies, which is a very, I think that holds a lot of water when you think about it.
Right.
And then you go to, you know, Skull Kid, you know, being possessed by Majora. Again, the way Skull Kid moves is just really fucking unnatural. The way he talks, the way he laughs,
Almost like he's almost like a marionette. I mean, because that's what he is. He's basically a puppet.
Yeah,
and
right. Yeah,
they make him move like one. Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like the way, in a way, kind of how Zant moves from Twilight Princess. Zant has a really unsettling movement to him as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, then you kind of, as you progress through the game, you kind of find out Skull Kid is just like this lonely child from the Lost Woods, and he's looking for a friend. And then eventually you find out Majora kind of mirrors that, just kind of looking for a friend. He actually just ends up leeching off of Skull Kid, basically. And again, like I drew the comparison to Link's Awakening, but again, this game is like self-contained. You get to know all the NPCs kind of in the same way, but I think it's even more so, and this is why it kind of beats out Link's Awakening for me. I think you get to know these NPCs more so because you have to interact them with, you have to interact with them more and more as you progress to actually make progress. The quest lines are deeper, and then as the days progress, you actually see the NPCs go through the stages of grief and trying to process their own mortality, knowing that in just a few hours it's going to be all over. Mm-hmm. You know, there's just there's a lot to dissect with this game when it really comes down to it. It really is all about processing grief, and the race against the clock mechanics. I mean, you talked about it. It's a very obvious manifestation of that type of anxiety.
Right.
The anxiety of, have I done everything I needed to do before I go? Mm-hmm. You know, it's a very relatable Zelda story. It's the most relatable Zelda story in the franchise. It's the most human story. Sorry to get like real fucking deep on your podcast, but I just think this game was a huge step forward in the franchise, and it's just something, especially story-wise, they haven't even come close to touching.
Right.
It's so different. It's so memorable. I could probably talk about this game forever. I think a lot of the stuff you said is very true of it. And we didn't really touch on the gameplay that much. But I don't know if we even mentioned you collect masks of dead spirits. Right. You put them on and they inhabit you.
Yep.
You know, so it's like Yeah, I don't know. Majora's Mask it's such a different. It's so fucking great.
Fierce deity Link,
Did you ever get that
hands down.
mask?
Oh yeah,
I've never in the 4 times I've played this game, I never got the Fierce Deity's mask.
you know me. I'm a completionist. Of course I got it.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
that
think I got it. I finally got it my third time playing it.
that final battle without the Fierce Deity's mask is fucking hard.
That final battle with it is fucking easy.
I mean, I've seen like playthroughs of people beating Majora with a Fierce Deity's mask. You don't even really get the sense of just how absolutely alien Majora is. Like Majora is so fucking weird.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you touched on it. I think you said it better than I did. When I was talking about the time and how the game makes you feel, so like I said, in games there's death and you're gonna die. Battling. That's how most games you die in is because you got killed by something. But you've got this other death that's looming over you that you know is going to happen. Um, and that's just crazy to think about. Like, oh, I could die in battle, or if I don't actually accomplish what I need to accomplish, I'm going to die anyway. And
Mm-hmm.
it is relatable in that we have a certain amount of time on the earth. We don't know what it is, what our expiration date is, but can you imagine if we did? Like, oh, you've got 3 days to live.
Yeah,
What can I do? What can I do? Have I accomplished everything? Is there anything I can do to prolong that? And
right.
it's like, yeah, it's deep, man.
Well, even in game, if we're talking just strictly game mechanics, in just about every video game you play as the hero and you die, but you don't see the ramifications of your death after you die. You don't see what happens to the world after that.
Right.
And so,
And in this case,
even
you die, the world dies too.
exactly, and you see that. You see what happened that after that, the final few hours, and you see the boon crashing into the planet. You see that happen. You see
Right.
what's ultimately what you failed to do.
Right. Yeah, man. I'm starting to wonder if that game should be higher on my list. Shit. Anyway, no, that's where it is. It's number 4 on mine. It's number 4 on yours. But we're gonna move along because we need to. Number 3 for me is Breath of the Wild. I'm gonna keep this short. Thank God it's brief. Breath of the Wild is the 19th main installment. 19th main installment of the Legend of Zelda series. It was released at the same time worldwide. One date for everybody, everywhere, on 2 systems, March 3rd, 2017. Yeah, for as much as I love Breath of the Wild, and as much as I think that it is one of the best Zelda games ever made, and I've played my fair share of open world games. I I haven't played them all. There's some popular ones that I just don't. I've never gotten into, or that I'd start playing that never got my attention or kept it. This one did, so therefore I probably think it's probably one of the better open world games ever created. I can't, and you and I have joked about it in the past, and I always say like, "Oh, it's the best game ever made." It's not, which is why it's only number 3 on my list.
What? Dude, you can't say that. You can't. You can't release this episode now.
This, I know it's shocking, isn't it? But you know, there's the lack of dungeons. That's I mean, the shrines were fine, but then they got repetitive after a while. After like a quarter of them, after like 30 of them, you're like, oh, another fucking like. I'd rather have 30 puzzles in one dungeon than 30 separate puzzles. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't feel invested. A lot of the people out there think that gosh, it's been so long that I'm forgetting names.
The champions?
That yeah, the champions, the four of them.
Urbosa, Rivali.
Rivali. That's what I was getting to.
Geez, dude, do you even play video games?
There's so many. That's the thing
This is
about this
the
game.
greatest video game of all time, dude, and you don't know any of the characters?
But it's also super bloated.
I'm leaving this. I'm leaving this podcast. I'm gonna.
There's so many. Okay, bye. There's so many characters that are involved in this game to make it as grand as it is that even those champions, like a lot of people are like just hardcore about them, especially Rivali. Like for some reason he's a fan favorite, and I fucking hate that guy. Yeah,
I would argue the opposite. There's no characters in this game, but
well, and that's the thing. For the first time ever, too, like you don't really connect with any NPCs, and there isn't enough story, if any at all. I mean, there's story. It's just not that good of a story, and it doesn't make me feel like I'm invested in Link or in Zelda. Like, I don't care what happened 100 years ago. I don't really care what's happening now. I'm just playing it because the game looks fucking great.
okay, I was gonna say. So, what do you like about the game? Because you're
Okay.
saying stuff that you don't like.
The game looks fucking great. The game is absolutely gorgeous from top to bottom. The music is absolutely phenomenal. I especially like Terrytown. That's my favorite track of the whole game. And the mechanics, the climbing. I actually liked the fact that you could start climbing a mountain, and then the rain's coming. And you're like, oh fuck, and you're trying to get that your stamina wheel going. You're trying to climb faster than taking a break. Because you want to beat the rain, and then it rains, and you slip and fall, and you're like, well, god damn it. Like, I actually liked that. I enjoyed that. I liked the adventuring part of it. There were some shrines that were a lot more enjoyable than others. I did like finding them. I did like unlocking them. I enjoyed the Divine Beast battles with the different forms of Ganon. It was as hated as some people make them. I'm saying that wrong. There's a vast majority of people that didn't like them. I did. To me, it was like having Ganon battles throughout the game. Well, 4 times, not including the DLC. And you just had different battles and different ways of having to defeat him because he's doing different things. And I kind of enjoyed that. And I was almost like having a final boss battle, initially 4 times, not including the last one.
Yeah, it was just like it's just kind of like the imprisoned in Skyward Sword, having to fight him 4 times.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Only the imprisoned was a little bit more the same each time to me. Like, I got tired of it.
One time you had to like take out 3 toes, and then the next time you had to take out 4 toes.
4, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know which one, if it was Windblight, Ganon. It had to be, because that's the one that sticks out. Like, I had some trouble with that one. He got the best of me probably the most, but I liked what was done within the game as far as, for me, trying to get as close to 100%, which was just never going to happen with this game. And again, side quests, Korok seeds, you can take those Korok seeds, you can turn them sideways and shove them straight up your candy ass, because there is no fucking way. I finished the game, and then I'm like, I'll do the Korok seeds after I finish the game. And I tried. And I'm like, this is dumb, and what do I get for it? So then I looked it up, and it was, when I heard it was a golden turd, I'm like, I'm not. 100%ing this game for a fucking golden turd. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. That's just ridiculous. So, yeah, Breath of the Wild is not a game that I. And technically, there's people that state that, oh, well, you got to unlock every costume. And, well, you know what? In order to unlock every costume, you also have to have amiibos, and you have to luck out. And you can only scan like one amiibo a day, and then you have to come back the next day and scan it and hope that you drop, a rare item drops. And then you got to take that rare item and then go to the fairies and get it upgraded. I'm like, I'm not. That for what? Just because it looks good on my screen? Like, nah. So, they came up with ways to drag it out to make it bigger than it actually is by adding that extra stuff in there to get you to keep coming back. That is just, if you can't do the collecting reasonable collection throughout a Zelda game while you're playing it, without going so far out of your way to get whatever you're getting after, like, to me, it's just a waste. And unfortunately, that's like the major gripe I have with Breath of the Wild is they try to hide that collectathon type shit in there to stretch it out so that you're thinking it's the most massive game I've ever played, but in reality, it's not. Especially when, if you really want to, you can start off on the plateau there, drop down, and go straight to Ganon, and good luck, So, but yeah, so it sounds like I got some gripes, but I still think, I think overall it's a grand Zelda game, and that's why I've got it at number 3.
So my number 3, I guess I want to preface this because at this point, the numbers and the way the rest of the games are ordered on my list mean absolutely nothing. Like, all of these games are basically number 1 to me, meaning that Majora's Mask is technically my number 2. So this is
okay.
Technically my top 4 Zelda games.
Okay.
Because any of these next 3 games, I fucking love them so much that depending on whatever my mood is, any one of these could be number 1. So this whole numbering business from here on out is basically just a formality at this point.
All right.
So my number 3 is The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is the 5th main installment of the Legend of Zelda series and the first to be released for the Nintendo 64. It was the most highly anticipated game of its age. It is listed... I don't think it really was that highly anticipated. More than Final Fantasy VII? I don't know. Anyway, it is listed among the greatest video game ever created by numerous websites and magazines. Released in the United States on November 23rd, 1998, it was the first game in the Legend of Zelda series that was visually displayed in 3D. Previous games of the series had a front or top-down view. It is generally considered to be a classic, most famously scoring the first perfect 40 out of 40 score in Famitsu magazine, a feat that only 26 games, including The Wind Waker, Skyward Sword, and Breath of the Wild, have ever achieved. In addition, G4 Television declared it, quote, the number 1 game of all time, end quote, as well as Nintendo Power. Of course Nintendo Power would say it's the fucking Nintendo. Ocarina of Time is listed in Guinness World Records Gamers Edition 2008 as the highest ranked game of all time. In 2010, Gamers Edition Ocarina of Time was updated as, quote, the most critically acclaimed game of all time, end quote. Jesus Christ. Blah, 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 blah. At E3 2010, a remake of the game for Nintendo 3DS was announced called Ocarina of Time 3D. The remake was released on June 2011. A lot of these next 3 ones is going to be just a lot of nostalgia. I mean, my first memory of this game is you coming home, and I remember these exact words. You were just super fucking excited. you might have been drunk. I don't know what the fuck was happening. I was just standing.
Drunk?
I was just standing in the kitchen, and you were like, dude, I got it. And I'm like, got? I was like, I don't know, got what? And then you showed me the box, and I was like, oh fuck! And then I got hyped because you were hyped, but I actually didn't know like what the fuck it was that you were hype about. But I was like, let's fucking go! All right, like you got this game. Like
I probably was drunk. I had just turned 21 when it came out, so I was probably drinking all the time.
I didn't have context for like a new Zelda game. Like I didn't know what games were coming out or what games had been announced at the time. It was just kind of basically whatever was in the house and whatever I saw on the shelves at fucking Blockbuster. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But when I first started it up and that fucking intro plays of Link riding on a horse across like this fucking open field, and that fucking like slow melancholic, piano starts playing, and I'm just like, oh my god, what is this? Like what am I about to play? And then the game opens up with the Deku tree, narrating like what's happened, and that the whole dream sequence plays where like Link is standing outside the castle and Zelda and Impa are escaping from this evil fucking Gallagher looking motherfucker. and then like you wake up in Kokiri Forest, which is still like one of my favorite Zelda areas just because of like the woodsy dreamlike atmosphere. You got like it's kind of like a little hazy because of the N64's limitations, but that haziness adds to it, and there's like these little particle effects flying around, and it all just comes together with the music of that area, which I also include the Lost Woods in this area because it's basically adjacent to it. Just the entire opening, I'm fucking hooked. And I'll be the first to admit, like the original game is hard to come back to. It is very ugly. Majora's Mask is kind of ugly, but it's not as bad because it does use that expansion pack. So there's a little bit more like vivid colors in that game. But obviously, I mean, these two games gain a lot from the 3DS remakes. And at the time, I think probably like unlike a lot of people my age, my mind wasn't actually blown when Link gets to the Temple of Time and turns into an adult. In fact, I was kind of a little more confused. Because it is very cinematic in the way like you build up to that moment is like really done like really, really well.
Right.
But that mechanic and stuff, like I had just seen in A Link to the Past, so what kind of blew my mind, I guess, or not really, like I said, it just kind of, I don't know, maybe confused me, is that Link could actually be an adult, because I guess like as a child, I always thought Link was also a child in all those 2D Zeldas. So, like, because I mean, that's kind of what Nintendo wants you to do. They want you to kind of like see yourself as Link, Now, I mean, obviously, like, I only ever played 2 other Zeldas before this game came out, but yeah, I don't know. I always just thought, does that even make any sense? I just always thought Link was just always a child.
Yeah.
And so
I thought so too.
So I just
except for I didn't think he was in Zelda 2. But which is weird because that's a direct sequel to the first one, but it's because his sprite was at the size that it was. I'm like, oh, well, he's like now an adult. Like 30 years must have passed or something,
Yeah, I just never thought like he could be an adult at any given time. So I was just kind of like, whoa, okay.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know what to really say about this game that you can't literally hear anybody else talk about on any other video game related content that's out on the internet. I just read 20 different quotes in a paragraph stating that this is one of the best games of all time, which I honestly, I kind of disagree with. It's really fucking good, and it's definitely important. It's a landmark game that really helped push the adventure genre forward into a 3D space with, the invention of Z targeting, which is something that every adventure game, every third person action game uses that very mechanic to this day.
Right.
Ocarina of Time wasn't my first Zelda game, but it is the first game that I beat. And despite what Nintendo tells us, Ganon does die in this game, and Link does return to his time.
But what if you just turned the game off before you even got to that point?
You should never turn this game off. You should play it front to back. Again, the original game is fucking hard to come back to. So if you have a 3DS, I would definitely grab the remake. Ocarina of Time is just one of those games that you should own.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all I got, really.
Okay. Well, let me add, and I'll preface this by saying, right at the top here, it's my number 2 on my list. So we'll go straight to number 2, and in this segue, I'm going to go straight into kind of, adding to the things that you said. Yeah, that's funny you remember that day that I came home with the game.
Dude, yeah, you were like, I got it. And I'm like, God, what? Because again, I'm not reading magazines or anything like that.
Yeah. There's some.
What was the lead up to that game for you?
Okay, so there was a shop in Fox Point, and I might have told you about this. It was a new and used game store, mom and pop, independently owned, on the corner of Port Washington and Brown Deer Road in the shopping center there. And I used to go there. It was funny, and it was right next to it was a Barnes & Noble, I think, that was there. So I would go there, and I would talk to the guy, and he was my window to what was going on in Japan, specifically with Nintendo. He knew a lot about Nintendo. And I have still to this day, I'm not sure.
Did his uncle work for Nintendo?
I don't know, but I mean, the internet was around, but it was still relatively brand new. I guess you could say it wasn't as explored, and I definitely didn't go on it outside of playing Yahoo Pool and using AOL chat for stuff. But he knew shit, and I would get imported Super Famicom games, and he'd have them, and that's where I bought them from. And of course, then he sold me the adapter that you would put in the Super Nintendo in order to play them. And that's how I first played Turtles in Time, was the Japanese version. I bought the Super Famicom version because it wasn't out here yet. And so, eventually, he would say, oh yeah, this is coming out and that's coming out. And then I would leave his store, and I'd go next door to Barnes & Noble, and I would grab video game magazines, like Electronic Gaming Monthly, for example. And I would sit there on the floor, cross-legged, in the Barnes & Noble, and read through the magazines. And it was more or less okay, does he know this because he's reading magazines? And I'm just not reading magazines? And, it was so weird because, literally he would tell me, oh, there's this, 3D Zelda game coming out. And then I'd go, and it took 2 months before anything was even in print about it. because then I'd go next door for like 2 months, and it took 2 months before I actually saw it in a magazine. I'm like, oh, what the fuck? How does this fucking guy know this shit? So that's my long story of what led me into it. And, slowly pictures would be released, and I'm like, holy shit, like every Zelda game so far has been like different. They look different, and they're always doing something different. And like, it really woke me up into the fact that they were so much more adventurous with this franchise than like Mario Brothers, that it kept me super excited when like the next game would come out. Which is why when Majora's Mask was coming out, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's great. It looks like Ocarina of Time, so I'm going to enjoy it. But it's really weird that like before I played it, to me, I'm like, this is like pretty much the exact same game. But what the fuck, Nintendo? Like, you totally had me on my toes with Ocarina of Time. Like, wow, you guys just keep mixing it up, and now you're releasing the same game again. But whatever. It's still turned out to be a great game. So that's what led up to it, is the fact that it was a third dimension game that this guy was talking about, and he kind of got me hyped for it. Arguably, it was, him. And to be honest with you, when that shop closed, I was lost. Like, I'm like, now I'm going to have to like subscribe to EGM, which I did.
Mm-hmm.
And probably get my news a little bit later than he would have. I don't know what happened to that guy, but, yeah, so a lot of things that you said, anyway. And yeah, it really started it not only started a lot of different mechanics for 3D games going forward, but it really was the tentpole for the Zelda series going forward. Like you said, the Z targeting mechanic, in 3D games it took some getting used to, but now it's almost like it's so revolutionary that you don't know what you would do without it, and the other thing was there's like the action button, which, it has different uses depending upon what environment Link is in. And the sound was phenomenal, and we can talk about music again, which we're going to have to kind of in a way. But like, just everything about it was absolutely mind-blowing for the franchise at the time, including for the first time, kind of including some dark areas like Ganon's Castle. It had hints of darkness, but the almost seemingly open world, and introducing Epona for the first time, and getting to ride on a horse to traverse the land quicker, and NPCs you actually, like, for the first time ever, like, felt connected to, the introduction of time travel, and getting into time travel. It was kind of like A Link to the Past, but much more advanced system of time travel, I felt, in that I think Nintendo realized that, hey, this is a franchise where we're really making great music for it, and we want music to be not only just what the player listens to that adds to the environment, but we now want music to be part of the gameplay too. So, you had, for the first time, a mechanic that involved music to play the game, to solve puzzles, a mechanic that would be used, of course, in Majora's Mask that we talked about, but also in like Wind Waker. What else was it in? Twilight Princess. I think that's all I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, and the fact that you can now bounce around and warp around and stuff like that too, like,
Yeah, I was
Go
gonna say, yeah, once you become an adult, Epona's pretty much useless because you can just warp around.
Right. So it made the game feel more grand on the scale that they gave you than it actually
Hmm.
probably really was. Um, but yeah, it really is a staple for not only what was to come in the series, but what a lot of other game series by other developers kind of stole. I guess I don't know a nicer way of saying it, but they were just like they borrowed from it, and in
Right.
it's something a lot of the mechanics of Ocarina of Time are around to this day in a lot of different third dimensional games that you play nowadays. And yeah, other than that, like I kind of touched on a little bit with Majora's Mask, it was the original. I mean, this would probably be my number one if it weren't, unfortunately, for nostalgia. I'll just say that, but there's just more replayability. You know, Ocarina of Time is probably the game that I've played second most often. And it's just because there's another one that's easier to play for me, to get into. But I've played Ocarina of Time probably like, including the 3D version, probably like 7 times or something. It's just, it is so well rounded, and it really is a great Zelda title. It's aside from nostalgia, it really is hard to beat, and that's why it's my number two.
Yeah, just real quick, I just want to elaborate on what you said about it being dark. It is kind of like a precursor to all of the very darkness of Majora's Mask. You know, you got my favorite Zelda temple of all time, even though it's not, there's nothing really special about it, is the Forest Temple because
Mm.
it, you are in this, like, it's basically a haunted mansion. The music in that temple is so fucking good.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even really a song. It's just like this combination of like this atmospheric like wailing and
Right.
like kind of like sounds like a wind going through like the halls and stuff.
It's like
It's
orchestrated
so
ambience.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then of course obviously you have the bottom of the well. Um, you've got the graveyard. I mean, you literally chase around a ghost. Um, the Shadow Temple doesn't get any darker than that. Um, what are those enemies called where they like pop out of the ground and they're just like covered in blood and stuff? Um,
Oh my god, dude. I don't know. I don't know off the top of my head.
it's very, it's very, very dark. It's just not in your face as Majora's Mask. But yeah, yeah, it's just yeah, like you said, it's a very well rounded Zelda title because it has a lot of humor in it and stuff, and it's very lighthearted at points.
Hmm.
But yeah, it also has some very serious stuff to it, which is obviously something that people really took a liking to. Apparently, when Wind Waker came out, so
Well, and you know the other thing too, and I've got to point this out because to this day, whenever they appear in a Zelda game, I'm like, oh fuck no. They introduced redeads. I fucking
yes, yes,
hate redeads. They are, to me, they are the creepiest, scariest enemies that you don't want. Like when you see one standing there motionless, and when you come into a room or something, you're like, oh fuck me. You know, like, oh my god.
well, it's because
And
when you first exit the Temple of Time, everybody's dead. You know, you were just in the market square and everybody's dancing around, having a good ass time. Little
yeah,
fucking Yorkie dog running around. And you come out of the Temple of Time as an adult, and there's just these zombies.
right.
You know, Ganon's castle's in the background. The town square is pretty much demolished. It's quite the juxtaposition to what you have just witnessed before entering the temple.
Right. Right. Yeah, they just, oh my gosh. And like the ones I think in that game they start out like in the fetal position, which makes it even
Yep.
more. Yeah, yeah. I'm
You don't
like
know
fuck
what,
that
yeah,
shit.
you're like, I
Fuck
don't
that
know what the
shit.
hell this is.
Yeah,
Like, what's going on? And then all of a sudden they stand up and you're like, oh, fuck.
yeah, yeah. And they've done a good job making them like more creepier as the series goes on, especially with their wailing and stuff.
Yep.
And their oh my god, yeah, no, stop. Okay, all right. So let's move along. What is your number two at?
The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past.
Wow. Okay.
The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past is the third main installment of the Legend of Zelda series and is the first and only one for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. After the side-scrolling and more RPG-like gameplay of The Adventure of Link, A Link to the Past was a return to the overhead view and gameplay style of The Legend of Zelda. It introduced the concept of two different worlds, one dark, one light, which was revisited to an extent in its console successor, Ocarina of Time, with two time periods rather than the dark and light worlds. A Link to the Past was re-released in 2002 on the Game Boy Advance system, sharing a cartridge with 4 swords.
Just to preface to everybody, Keith and I had absolutely no knowledge prior to this of where any of these games would fall on our respective lists. So I'm honestly quite intrigued at this point, considering this is your number two, to hear why it's number two, and I'm really kind of intrigued to hear what your number one is. But
Again, the numbers are just a formality at this point. Like, this could be
yeah, I know.
tomorrow. This could be my number one, depending on what I feel like.
That's very true. That's very true. Go ahead and talk about it a little bit.
I mean, this is another game where I probably just won't even really talk about the actual game. It's going to be more of like my experience, personal experience of it. This is the first Zelda I vividly remember seeing, and the first one that I actually played. And, before, it took me a long time to actually play it. Before playing it, I actually watched you play it almost exclusively. For the longest time, all I can remember, this is what you were playing for a very long time. I remember, staying at Grandma and Grandpa's, and you brought the Super Nintendo with, and I remember sitting in the guest room, and I remember watching you play it. I remember staying up late at night, whether or not you knew I was awake or not. I remember, sitting on the top of the bunk bed, kind of looking over and watching you, play it, travel through the dark world. And, oftentimes, eventually I would fall asleep, to the sounds of, some fucking dungeon music. I remember posters that you tore out of magazines and hung them up on the bedroom wall. A Link to the Past was the video game in our house for some time. And similar to my history with the first Zelda game, which I talked about on the episode we did for my show, this game felt like I wasn't supposed to play it. Like, it wasn't made for kids. It was for like adults.
Interesting.
But eventually you moved on. You moved on to some other games, and that's kind of when I started playing it for myself.
Oh, like Home Alone 2, in the Addams Family.
Turtles in Time, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I never did get very far in this game when I was a kid. In fact, I never beat it until after I beat Ocarina of Time. I was, around Ocarina of Time, I was very much getting into emulating in 1998. And so after Ocarina, I was just dying to play more Zelda. And so I ended up getting A Link to the Past and beating it through emulation. But back in the day, your save file was still on that cartridge. And whenever I was stuck, I would dip into your save file and try and figure out what I missed or like where I should go next, which is something that actually never really helped just because the
Yeah.
gameplay doesn't lend well to that kind of strategy, you
Yeah, I was
know?
going to just ask you that. It doesn't,
But
yeah.
but like for me as a kid, it was really fun to look at your fully powered up Link, you know,
Hmm.
and like look at that completed inventory and then getting to look forward to like, you know, oh shit, like there's a fire wand in here. And like,
Hmm.
why is his Link red? You know, and why does
Mm.
his sword look different? Like it was all this stuff where I was like, it was so mysterious to me. And the world is just filled with all of these secrets that I was just like, I can't wait to find out where this stuff is, how to get it, you know, the event. I, just getting the gold sword, you know, doing it now is just kind of like a series of just go here, go there. But to me as a kid, I was like, this is an adventure in of itself of the entire game. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
Um, you know, objectively looking at the game, I mean, it's the same template as that first Zelda game. And in a lot of ways, like a lot of the first party Nintendo games that came out for the Super Nintendo were just kind of seemed like remakes of the initial games that came out. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, except I
That's
guess
exactly
like,
what they were. I mean,
yeah, I guess calling A Link to the Past Super Zelda would have been like a really stupid
that would
name,
have been
but
dumb. Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, man, this game was so dense. You know, finding one secret eventually leads you to another secret, and I feel like every screen is has something on it. No, like no part of the game is wasted, you
Hmm.
know. And you know, speaking of Ocarina of Time and the time mechanics and stuff, you know, after you're sent to the Dark World, this is when my mind was fucking blown. Um, because it took me, as a kid, it took me forever to finally get to Aghanim,
Mm.
which, you know, now as an adult, it only takes a couple hours, you know,
Right.
if that. But I'm like, as a kid, I'm just like, fuck yeah. I fucking, I fucking beat the final boss. Like, holy shit. But then the game is like, no, there's still like 75% of game and there's still 8 more dungeons. Also, the entire world map has changed and the enemies are all harder now.
Hmm.
Um, also, you can move back and forth between the light and the dark world, and you use that mechanic to figure out different puzzles and find other secrets around the world. Um, it seems like talking about it, it seems so quaint now. You know what I mean? Like it's like,
Yeah.
and I think for me, this game has the best Master Sword sequence.
By far.
Like you're running
Hmm.
through the Lost Woods. There's like this dense fog, and there's like all these animals kind of like scattering around, and you get to the pedestal, and the sword is just sitting there. It has this aura of that it's just been sitting there for like thousands of years, and it felt so rewarding to pick the sword up, and you know the screen starts flashing the pendants, the 3 pendants that you've got, they shatter, and
Hmm.
then all of a sudden the fog clears and sunlight begins to pour through the canopy of the trees, and then the Legend of Zelda theme starts playing.
Yeah.
You know, it's so fucking cool. They really, I think, pushed the creative boundaries of what you could do on a 16-bit console at the time.
Hmm.
And I mean, graphically, the game just looks absolutely amazing. It's the oldest Zelda title on my list. I guess maybe that's a spoiler for number one, but I could safely say it's like the easiest, especially on the eyes, to go back to. I think it is. I think it's the perfect Zelda game. Some of the gameplay still feels extremely modern. Everything about this game has aged perfectly,
Yeah.
but it is not my favorite Zelda, despite how highly I'm talking about it.
Well, we all know it's Breath of the Wild, but we'll get there.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to be able to talk about A Link to the Past, but before I do, I think we should reveal what my number one Legend of Zelda console title is of all time. And I think you all know where this is led up to. But my number one is A Legend of Zelda.
Wand of Gamelon.
Exactly. I was about to spit it out, and I just couldn't keep myself from laughing. Fuck, I fucked it up. I could do it over and edit it, but no. That's what I was going to say, but I just could not contain my laughter. No, it is A Link to the Past. Damn it. Fuck. I had it planned for a week. I had it planned for a week, and I knew I was going to say it, but when time came to say it, I couldn't keep a straight face. Fuck. All right. Anyway, yeah. A Link to the Past, man. Fuck. It's everything you said. For me, it is the greatest game ever made. I mean, and I say that because it's my favorite series. I love the series so much that if this game was to appear as my number one, as it does, it's obviously the greatest game ever to me. It just is, hands down. It is the epitome of taking a formula that worked very well the first time and saying we are going to just feed it as much cocaine as possible and make it the greatest thing you've ever played. And it, like you said, because it's almost like playing the first one, except it took probably one of the coolest mechanics of Zelda 2, which obviously didn't make, which is the use of magic. It carries magic over. And it really cemented so many things for that series. The fact that, Ganon truly can't be defeated without the Master Sword. And the use of silver arrows as the final blow. And it had, I think, one of the biggest, well, I want to call it a reveal, a surprise reveal, but a swerve, since finding out that Samus was a chick, in that Ganon basically he was the big bad the whole time. Like, he kind of just, when you think you've beaten the game, he appears and I can't remember. See, now I'm really trying to remember. Did he turn into he turns into the bat that flies off to the pyramid and crashes the hole through the top, which I think it's the only time in Zelda history that Ganon ever turned into a bat, right? But, and reintroducing him, and he's got his trident, and there's so many things that happen in the game, and really making the NPCs matter. The fact that, they're guiding you and creating side quests that were actually fun to do, and upgrading the sword and your clothes, and it was so great. And obviously those things, to most people, it worked because they carried on so many things from A Link to the Past, into the other titles. So the dungeons were good. Of course, it was the first Zelda game. We're talking about music just a little bit. That really felt like the music was this is it. From this game forward, that's when music was really important to a Zelda game, was with this one, with A Link to the Past. And even replaying replaying it, like, because growing up as a kid, there's a lot of times you would play a game and then put headphones on and listen to music. You can't do that with Zelda. You just can't. You gotta have the music makes the game, and it started here. Playing Four Sword Adventures for the first time recently, which didn't make my list, and now I was battling with that one because there is nostalgia in that it is basically a GameCube Link to the Past.
It's fan service.
Yeah. But overall, it's just a terrible. It's not a terrible game.
Mechanically, it's not
the best.
Well, single player.
Right. But you had the music and the sound effects and everything from A Link to the Past in that game, and I was just like, so it made playing through the game a little bit easier, having that nostalgia trip of sound going into my ear holes.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it's just, and introducing the light and dark, and that yeah.
Before you move on, I just want to say something else about the music. A lot of the compositions here pretty much carry forward from here on out.
Right.
One of my better memories with Breath of the Wild is when I decided to finally just check out Hyrule Castle, and as you get closer to the castle, the Hyrule Castle theme from A Link to the Past starts playing, but it's all orchestrated, and it's much more majestic, much more well orchestrated than any other iteration of that theme. And it really, I'm going to be 35 years old now. My voice is still cracking. It just really brought a lot of nostalgia, because you don't hear the Hyrule Castle theme that much throughout the series. It appears here and there, but something about just standing in front of this massive castle and you're just like, oh fuck, like it just made that moment feel that much more imposing, you know what I mean? But then you got the theme for Kakariko Village,
yep,
the Lost Woods. I can't even think of anything else off the top of my head right now, but you also mentioned the twist of Aghanim being Ganon. There's also a twist at the beginning of the game where you rescue Zelda right away.
Yeah.
That blew my fucking mind too, because it's like a lot of games up to that point, that's the end game, to rescue the princess. It's the trope. Right. And you get her right away. That's the first thing you do.
Yeah.
The entire opening is done so well. You even get like this little like preamble at the beginning when you start the game, and I don't remember the name of the war, but they kind of tell you, they kind of set up, what's been happening in this world with this war that's going on. And sorry, I had to interject and just add a little bit to what you were saying.
Yeah, to put it simply, so I said Ocarina of Time was like the tentpole for 3D games for the series, and almost any 3D game going forward. A Link to the Past is the absolute backbone of the series. The entire game worked so well that almost everything from that game moved forward, including the music. And then, of course, the music just gets better and better. In my opinion, it gets better and better with every game, except Breath of the Wild has its moments. Terrytown, I fucking love Terrytown. But it really, nostalgia, yes, it plays heavy. But it plays heavy because at the time I played it, I thought it was the greatest game I ever played. And even playing it now, I still think it's the greatest game ever. And I have to look at it as if I had never played it and I played everything else after, and then I played it now, what would I think? And I'd be like, holy shit, this is the greatest game ever, because it literally, everything that I love about the series after, this is where it all started, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't start, I mean, yeah, you could say it started with the original Legend of Zelda, but and in a way it did. But like I said, A Link to the Past is that, but just a million times better. Taking that formula that worked and just making it work so much better. Because obviously Zelda 2 is very broken, in my opinion. In fact, as far as the last two games, it would be a fight actually between Skyward Sword and Zelda 2 for my worst, because I dislike them both. Sorry to say, I was actually surprised you had Skyward Sword on your 7. To be honest with you, but yeah, I could easily have one episode a game, and or a game per episode, one game per episode, and take forever to talk about, top whatevers in each game. But yeah, just A Link to the Past is just nothing. I don't think Nintendo could put out any other Zelda game ever in my lifetime that's going to topple that from number one. It's just going to be, it'd be so hard. It'd be really hard. So
It's a good game.
it is. It is. I think, like, again, I said, in my opinion, it is the perfect game. So
I would agree with that.
okay. So, but considering all things,
Yes, you
in your
now,
blurry 3 here.
now and I think if anybody's coming from my podcast and listening to this, they know I am an RPG guy. I love JRPGs. Around when Ocarina of Time came out, I was heavily into JRPGs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's only natural for me to have my number one be The Legend of Zelda: The Adventure of Link.
Shut the fuck up. Are you serious?
No.
Oh my god.
I pulled that off better than your Wanda Gamelon fake out.
You did.
No, my number one, and again, like this, man, it's so hard. Again, these last three are so hard. My number one is The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker.
Okay.
I remember when this game was announced. I remember all the discourse in those early days of the internet, of people bashing this game on forums and comments and all the stuff that were left on websites back in those days. I never really fell into any of that because, as far as I knew, I mean, video games are for kids anyway. Mm-hmm. And up to that point, every video game we have played looks like a cartoon, So seeing Wind Waker for the first time, I was like, oh shit, like this looks like a real ass cart. Like this looks like what people have been trying to do, I guess, with video games, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
With that said, I didn't play the game right away. In fact, I don't, I'm pretty sure I bought it, didn't I?
Probably.
I think I did.
Because it had water in it, I wasn't very excited, so.
I was, yes. I mean, at the time, this came out and you already did the whole preamble. This is 2003, I think. So I was like really into the PS2 at the time. I was playing a lot of GTA 3, Silent Hill 2, Metal Gear Solid, Tony Hawk, all that stuff.
Right.
And I mean, I loved the GameCube, but honestly, like all it was a Smash Brothers Melee machine, So, but the GameCube was collecting dust, and I was kind of like, I think that's what makes me believe I went out and just got Wind Waker. I was just like, I want to play something that's not GTA 3 or Smash Brothers,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the very first Zelda that I actually bought on my own. And when I got my hands on it, yeah, I didn't buy it at launch. I think it was close to launch. It was probably like late 2003 or 2000, early 2004. I probably bought it with like some Christmas money or something.
Yeah.
But I couldn't put it down once I bought it. It's, I think the one Zelda that I have completed the most.
Hmm. Okay.
Maybe, maybe A Link to the Past irks it out just a little bit, but probably not by much. Um, Going back to Twilight Princess again, that's a game that I wasn't completely moved by. Um, and I remember after playing that Twilight Princess after it came out, I went immediately back to Wind Waker and started a new game.
Hmm.
And I also got my girlfriend at the time um, into Wind Waker. And if I wasn't playing the game, I was watching her play it, and seeing
Hmm.
the same reactions, she had, or the same reactions I had uh, playing it the first time, figuring out the Goma fight, or
Oh yeah.
interacting with Makar,
Hmm.
during the Wind Temple.
Hmm.
Um, it's it's just a game I'm totally in love with, and still am. The art style, I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, even if
I,
the HD remake didn't come out, this game would still hold up.
yeah, and I was just gonna say, with that HD remake, I would argue it's absolutely the best. I mean, because of the cell shading, I actually find that style to be more beautiful in high
Mm,
definition than Breath of the Wild. I think Wind Waker looks gorgeous
yeah.
in
Yeah, Breath of
HD.
the Wild takes a little bit of that same art direction in a little bit,
A
or
little bit.
a little,
It
yeah,
mixes it a little bit more with reality.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's the thing is that's the one thing that did carry on. Is Nintendo's not afraid to put some of that cell shading in, even like talking about Four Sword Adventures again, even though it is reminiscent of A Link to the Past, it's actually the Wind Waker cell shading in disguise. They use um, a lot of that for the enemies. When things go up in smoke, it's Wind Waker smoke.
yep.
When they show what the characters look like in their close-up art form, it's actually Wind Waker, not A Link to the Past. Uh,
Right.
it's it's like the best of both games in like a pretty mediocre game, honestly.
And as far as the story goes, I mean, it's kind of your typical Zelda game. It's just structured very differently. I think it's
Yeah.
a little more. It's a lot more Journey to the West, hero's journey, than I think any other Zelda.
Hmm.
Um, as far as that goes, I think this iteration of Link, has the most character out of any Link, which is only helped by that animation style and just how expressive he is. This is the most expressive Link there has ever been. He's his sass, his sassiness is only matched by Midna, really. Um, but also, like, this Link has a family. He's living a life already when you're first introduced to him. He has a sister,
Right.
Errol. They live with their grandmother on Outset. Whereas other iterations of Link are just, here he is. He's just he's an orphan that works on a farm.
Hmm.
Or here's Link. He just woke up in a hospital bed. Off you go, kill the bad guy. Like, and like right away, like the dangers aren't, like, the bigger picture isn't really established right away. Like, it's kind of small stakes. Errol gets kidnapped, and then you meet a bunch of pirates, and then you go to the Forsaken Fortress. This is where Ganondorf comes in, and he actually gets some really good characterization in this game. He
Hmm.
seems like an evil son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Zelda, Zelda is fucking amazing in this game, and in hindsight, it's a little silly now. But back then, when I first played the game, I thought Errol was going to be Zelda, because I mean, she kind of looks the part. She's a little young, but
Yeah.
But
That would have been
whatever.
a weird flex that they were actually blood relatives, though.
Yeah, I think it could have worked though. Either way, it doesn't matter because
It would have broken the whole like what the series is supposed to be based upon.
none of them are interconnected. It doesn't matter.
I know they're not interconnected, but you're talking about there's supposed to be a princess and there's supposed to be a hero, and they're supposed to be evil, and in different incarnations they appear, and to have
But who's to say they're blood relatives? They're on outset with their grandmother. They
I
could have been adopted, and that could not be their real
suppose
grandma.
that would have been quite the
So,
twist to have Link be a prince, though. Too, if you think about it.
yeah. Well,
No.
either way, Zelda turns out to
Okay.
be a fucking badass pirate.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's
Though
equally
in
as
Phantom
fun.
of though in Phantom Hourglass she's not that badass of a pirate because you got to go fucking save her. But whatever. She gets herself captured.
I mean, to discredit this game a little bit, Zelda does just end up being a princess towards the last third of the game.
Yeah.
She's no longer that badass anymore, but whatever. It's better than her being emo as fucking Breath of the Wild. you know, I'm not good enough. Shut the fuck up. Um, this was also the first game in the series where it essentially establishes that it is a sequel to Ocarina when you go beneath the ocean and you go to Hyrule Castle, you know? Well, actually, no, it's not the first sequel. Link's Adventure is technically the first
Yeah,
sequel.
it's tied in as a sequel, but still taking place.
But it doesn't. Link's Adventure doesn't really pay any attention to, or doesn't really specifically tell you that it's actually the sequel to the first game. It's the second game that came out,
Right.
and people are obviously like, "Oh, it's the second Zelda. It's the same world." Blah blah blah. This one specifically is like, "All right, you're going to go to Hyrule Castle. You're going to go to Castle Town and stuff like that." And it was one of those things where it's like, Ocarina of Time was only 5 years old at this point. But when I first went underneath the ocean and saw that and entered the castle, like the nostalgia for Ocarina of Time came rushing back, which is crazy because it wasn't that old at that point. You know what I mean? And they specifically reference the Hero of Time and the fight with Ganon, and the music that plays while you're in the castle is again the Hyrule Castle theme, but it's like also a little dull. It's not very loud. It's really just kind of like mixed in with the background, and it's accompanied by like everything in the castle just being completely frozen in time, and it's just such an eerie moment.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that makes this game so like magical for me, you know. Everything, there's a lot of things about this game that's fucking magical. Just a lot of the characters that you meet, a lot of the different islands. Yeah, just being out, I know you hate water, but being out in the open ocean, I think gives this game the biggest sense of adventure out of any Zelda, and completely, to me, reinvents the franchise after, Majora's Mask. And even like some of the mechanics from this game carry over to a lot of the modern games. Some of the stealth sections, the way you're able to steal weapons from enemies. The battle mechanics in this game are fucking. I love the battle mechanics and like the little quick time event that you can do. And then there's all the new sword skills that you can learn that opens up different possibilities on how to encounter an enemy. It's not the perfect Zelda game. I think that goes to A Link to the Past. And there are things that obviously I think can be improved on, and I think have been a little bit in the HD remake. I fucking love everything about this game. I really can't recommend Wind Waker enough. And even talk about the music, and even really talk about the dungeons. Dragon Roost Isle has my favorite Zelda track of all time. Yeah, man, I could spend forever talking about this game.
Yeah, you know, like I said, you take the water out of it, I probably could have bumped it up a few. That's just a mechanic that just didn't sit well with me, unfortunately.
The ghost ship,
Um,
trying to track down the ghost ship and getting into that. I fucking love that little quest line.
yeah, well, you know what? Did you ever play Phantom Hourglass?
See, I always get Phantom Hourglass mixed up with Spirit Tracks. Phantom
Well, one's on
Hourglass
a
is
boat and one's on a train, so
right. Phantom Hourglass is the one where you have to revisit the same dungeon like 100 times, right? Do the same puzzles, all that stuff, right?
you have to. Yeah, there's a temple in the beginning
Yep.
that you have to keep getting deeper into,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
through six different revisits or something. Yeah.
yeah. I played it.
Oh, okay. And it sounds like that should be your favorite. From the sounds of how much you love Wind Waker, that Phantom Hourglass should be your number one handheld Zelda title or something, because it
No,
regurgitates a lot of what Wind Waker is. Only there's a lot of stupid shit in it. But
yeah, no, I don't. I don't really
oh,
like
okay.
Phantom Hourglass that much. My number one handheld Zelda would be.
Hey, no, I'm gonna have to just try to mute that just in case you do appear on a future episode. All right. Well, so this was very interesting, and obviously, I'm kind of surprised. I'm not surprised about Breath of the Wild. You not saying anything about that. That doesn't surprise me at all.
I talked about
But
Breath of the Wild.
no, I'm talking about it not being on your list,
Oh,
on your 7. I have a feeling that's probably like your 11 or something, but that's okay. That's all right.
yeah. If we were to combine all the Zelda titles, that wouldn't even make a top 10 for me.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, yeah. So, yeah, it's funny. Like you talk about Wind Waker, like you did, and it does make me appreciate. It really does make me appreciate more of the depth. No pun intended, as far as talking about water. Of that game.
And the voice, I mean, there's technically not voice acting, but the woman who does Link's voice in that game does a fucking phenomenal job.
Yeah.
Her voice matches exactly whatever expression he has or whatever's
Right.
happening in the game. She does
The
it so well.
expressions, Link's expressions,
Dude, he's
really,
sassy.
yeah,
He's real
yeah,
sassy.
fucking love it, fucking love it.
And she comes back. I mean, she's the current voice of Toon Link in Smash Brothers Ultimate too. She comes back.
Yeah, and that's funny that Nintendo has different voice actors for Link depending upon what iteration of Link is being presented. Whereas not only is Mario voiced by one actor, but that one actor voices Luigi and Waluigi and Wario,
Right.
and no matter what version, I mean, you don't get different versions of Mario per se, but
What if you did?
that would just be dumb. That would just be dumb. But anyway, that could get us way off track. But yeah, that's our 7. That's our 7 Zelda console titles, if you will. But before we go, since Keith likes to play games on his Main Quest podcast, I thought I would turn tables.
I'll see you in court. Okay. My podcast is the only podcast that has games on it.
Well, and this is the only time I'm ever going to play games, because I do have some other plans in the works, and I'm not going to play games with anybody else. It's just you. It's only you. And we are going to start with the inaugural. I can never say that word.
Inaugural?
The very first ever game on Retro Rankings podcast. So there are 19. And now, Keith doesn't know exactly where this is going. I kind of gave him a hint of where it's going, but he doesn't know exactly where it's going. There are 19 main Zelda games in the series, and they all got to go somewhere on this timeline. that we spoke about earlier and we've kind of touched upon. We all know how fucking ridiculous the supposed timeline is, which I think
it's garbage.
Fans called for it, I think, with Wind Waker. I think when Wind Waker touched on other parts of what makes Zelda in its history Zelda, I think that's where fans were like, what the... Wait,
I think it was Skyward Sword. Because
you think so?
No, yeah, because Nintendo made a point to say that it came before all of the other Zeldas.
The time...
and then the timeline... Historia came out, like, what, 2 years after that? A year after that?
I think the timeline started to be built before that, though. And so when Skyward Sword came out, everybody's like, where the fuck does this fall? And Nintendo's just like, okay, well, this will be the first one.
What if I told you the timeline doesn't make any sense and it doesn't need to exist?
Okay, well, it doesn't. It doesn't need to exist. I'm not one of those people that called for it. I could care less. But anyway, we are going to try to see how well Keith might know where a game falls in this timeline. I call this game, where in the good goddess of highly does this Zelda game go on this fucking timeline? Are you ready to play? Try not to cheat. I hear you.
I was going to say, let me get these tabs open again.
I'm going to try to make this as easy as possible. So I'm going to give you the 5 timelines. If you want to write them down or just take a one word from each one to tell me what they are when I ask you. You've basically got the hero of time. You've got the fallen hero. You've got the child. You've got the adult. And you've got the great calamity. Those are the 5. So hero of time, fallen hero, child, adult, great calamity. I'm going to give you, because this podcast revolves around the number 7, I'm going to give you 7 of the 19 titles, and you're going to tell me where in the timeline it falls within what I just provided.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get 10 points if you get it correct, for a total of 70 points. However, you're going to get an additional 4.285 bonus points each if you can tell me the specific era then it falls within the timeline, and that's on you. I'm not going to give you the eras because there's too many of them. For a total of a possible total of 99.99 points. But because I'm generous, I'm going to round up an extra 100th point where it matters, and I'll just round up the score for you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, kind of like when you're at the grocery store and they want you to donate to a charity for children who are stricken with horsetails that grow out of their navels or something, okay?
What the fuck?
So, are you ready to play?
It's a lot easier to keep the flies away when it's on the front of your belly.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
A Link Between Worlds.
What is it? The hero, fallen, child, adult.
Hero of time, fallen hero, child, adult, and great calamity.
Fallen.
That is correct. Do you know what era it falls within? Do you even know any of the eras?
I don't know any. I don't know what's an era, for example.
Shit.
Without giving it away, the answer to this one. The Golden Age.
Oh boy, how can I? Okay.
The Renaissance.
So you had creation. You had decline. You have light. You have dark. You have the Force. Sometimes
stop.
You have light and dark.
I don't know any of these.
Okay.
You can just go.
Okay. It's the era of light and dark. Because, and that's kind of easy. If you knew the eras, that'd be kind of easy because it's a sequel to A Link to the Past. And that is obviously light and dark. The Minish Cap.
That's the hero.
Which one? The hero of time or the fallen hero?
The hero of time.
You're looking this shit up.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
You want me to share my screen with you?
No.
Can we do that on here?
I'm not. Yes, but that's okay. I'm good.
Okay.
And you don't know the era?
No.
Okay, so that would be the Force era. The Wind Waker. You got to know this one.
That's child, right?
That is incorrect. It's the adult.
Oh,
It is the adult timeline, and actually, there is no defined era that it falls within. Believe it or not. The Legend of Zelda, the original.
Fallen?
That is correct. That is the fallen hero timeline during the era of decline. Okay, number 5, Spirit Tracks.
Oh, now hold on. The Fallen timeline only exists when Link is killed by Ganondorf, right? In Ocarina?
Yes, that's where it splits.
Oh, because it's weird because I remember killing Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time. But anyway, go ahead. What's the next one?
Fuck you. Number 5 is Spirit Tracks.
Adults.
That is correct. And Spirit Tracks, like Wind Waker, has no era that it falls within.
I would call it the locomotive era.
The locomotive era.
Yeah.
Okay.
Boats.
I mean, you can make up your
trains.
own. Why not? They should make like a.
It was the era of automation.
So they had, yeah, they had the boat, they had the train. Maybe they need to do like a.
And in Breath of the Wild, he gets a motorcycle. So I think it falls. I think Breath of the Wild
gosh.
falls under the adult timeline here.
Okay. Number 6 is Majora's Mask.
That's child.
Careful. Yep, it is child. It is child, and guess what? There's no timeline for that one. Or era, I should say, sorry, in that timeline. And the last one, now this is tricky. Are you ready? This one's tricky. Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages.
Fallen?
Very good. And that would be in the era of Light and Dark, much like A Link Between Worlds and A Link to the Past. So when you really think about the type of games that they make, Nintendo makes it kind of easy. If one game looks like another game, that's the era it actually is in, because those are the incarnations that they're trying to present.
Oh yeah, knowing Spirit Tracks was a sequel to Wind Waker. It was like, if I got Wind Waker wrong, then I know Spirit Tracks is that other one, you know?
Right. Okay, so you got a total of 60 out of 99.99 potential points. But really, the last 30 were just bonus points. You scored 60 out of 70. So
I'll have you know, as dumb and asinine as that timeline is, I actually know it pretty well because I've looked at it. Because back in 2015, when I was replaying all the games, I was replaying it in order of the timeline.
Oh,
so
impressive. I don't think that's something I've ever done, nor will it probably be.
I wouldn't
something
recommend
I will
it.
ever do. Yeah, that would. Yeah, no, I don't think. Especially because there's some games I don't want to replay.
That's when I started with Skyward Sword.
All right, and Skyward Sword was actually, if I remember correctly, you bought me that game for like my birthday or something, didn't you?
I did.
They didn't come with the gold controller though, did it?
No.
That was just the regular one. Yeah.
No, I wasn't going to spend that much money on you.
Yeah, you bastard. Anyway, so that's going to do it. Keith, thanks for joining me on this grand adventure talking about Zelda. Can you let everybody know where we can find you?
So yeah, I host the Main Quest podcast. You can find that pretty much on anything you listen to podcasts on. If it ain't on there, shoot me an email at mainquestpod@gmail.com. Follow the show on Instagram. That's the Main Quest on Instagram. I post a lot of stuff that has to do with what's coming up on the show. I post a schedule up there as well, so you can play along if you'd like to. Otherwise, you can also get a hold of me on Twitter, which is professional. Hold on, let me pull something up. I don't use Twitter that much. But if
You're
you
using
want
it more
to,
often. You're using it more often than I ever expected you to use it.
my handle Twitter is at MainQuestPod. If you want to get weird. So yeah, you can find me at all of those places.
Awesome sauce. Yes, I do have one complaint. I have tried to listen to your podcast on my podcast potato. It's simply a potato that I wrote the word podcast on, and I try to plug headphones into it, but I can't get your podcast on there. So can you look into that for me?
I will
Podcast.
do my
Podcast potato.
best. I'm gonna have to talk to Big Potato and see if they can
Okay.
do something about that. We'll rearrange.
Maybe you
something
can
here.
maybe you can russet a little something up for me.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, thanks, Spud. I appreciate it. All right, so that's going to do it for Keith. Keith, toodles, adios. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No problem. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for us today. If you're not familiar yet, you can go to potationrotation.com, and there you'll find all the links to our YouTube content, Potation Rotation reviews, and the License to Drink channel on YouTube. You can also contact me by email at potationrotation@gmail.com, and all the socials is also available on there: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and if it's easier for you, you can also listen to every new episode of this podcast right there on the homepage of the website. I want to thank Keith again for joining us today. This was a long one. I hope we held your attention. I appreciate you guys being here, and we'll see you guys on the next Retro Rankings Podcast episode. Later.